Hello and welcome to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host for today, Rory Bryce, and joined by Dave Proudlove. How's it going, mate?
Evening, Roy. All right, mate. All right. All good for a freezing cold Thursday night, anyway.
We're also joined this evening by Phil Harrison from Football Geeks on Twitter. How's it going, mate? Good to see you again.
Hey, it's going well, mate. Yeah, good to see you as well. Always a pleasure to be on the show. Really looking forward to this one. Yeah, it's an exciting tale to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really good one. And Phil, of course, an expert on all things Central European and Eastern European football from the former Soviet bloc. And he's just been away on a trip to the country that we're going to today. We're going to be discussing Dukla Prague, club from the Czech Republic who, well, they didn't fold. They merged with another club, as we'll come on to discuss, but who are still playing in the Czech leagues under a different name. It's all a little bit complicated. If you've not heard of them, Dukla Prague were a club from the Czech Republic. They were founded in 1948 as ATK Praha, and they ended up winning a total of 11 Czechoslovak league titles and 8 Czechoslovak cups. So they were quite a successful team. I mean, are they a club that both of you have come across quite often when you've been reading and talking about football history?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's quite timely to be talking about these fellas, seeing as Christmas is approaching. I was up in Birkenhead the other day, and obviously Birkenhead's finest recorded that little ditty. All I want for Christmas is a Dukla Prague away kit, which so I think it's good timing that. But yeah, they're a club I'm aware of. The history is really interesting, and it's like how things are sort of panned out with the mergers and whatever. It's like I guess I don't know, Tottenham merging with Dulwich Hamlet and rising again, if you like, So yeah, it's a fascinating story for me, I think.
What about yourself, Phil? You must have come across them quite a lot just in your studies as well on teams from that region of the world.
Yeah, of course, mate. Yeah, they're just they were always a kind of enigma. I mean, the Dukla Prague that presently reside in the Czech second division aren't the Dukla Prague that Half Man Half Biscuit sang about in 1987. They're a completely different club. Although,
yes,
if you speak to nostalgist FK Dukla fans of the present era, they would vehemently disagree with you on that and say that it is the bones of the same club. I mean, evidently they play at the same stadium that Dukla Prague played at, the BlueSky, which is a fantastic stadium right there amongst the hills of Prague. Great view of the city. And that's in the Davice area of Prague, which we'll talk about because the club that replaced them, they were Dukla Davice originally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point and one that we'll come on to talk about. And obviously, football fans, particularly from Central and Eastern Europe, are incredibly passionate. What I will say is that I'm going into this episode with the entire opinion that the current FK Dukla Prague are not the original Dukla Prague that we're talking about at the moment. We'll talk about that, and I think I'll be able to lay it out quite well. But it's a really, really interesting story. But the original Dukla Prague, they were a very, very successful club in the Czech leagues. They had some fantastic European exploits as well. Very, very well-known team, very, very well supported. They didn't even necessarily fall on hard times either when it sort of came to the end. They again, like a lot of the clubs that we cover, they sort of went out with a bit of a whimper and not a bang. I mean, do you guys, the clubs that you follow, did they ever have any brushes with Dukla Prague at all?
I support Birmingham City, mate. So my club haven't had many brushes with any European teams.
I mean, Stoke have had, back in the early 70s. I'm a Stoke City fan, and 2 European campaigns. We got hammered by Kaiserslautern in one, and went out on away goals to Ajax in another. Say the most recent, we did okay in the Europa League a few years back. I say a few years back. It's more than a few years back now. But obviously, we've not crossed paths with Dukla Prague. And there's a bit of history between Stoke-on-Trent and a place called Lidice, just outside Prague, but nothing to do with football. But no football related adventures between Stoke City and Dukla Prague.
Yeah, I mean that's entirely fair. I do remember Stoke in the Europa League right enough, but maybe one day we'll see FK Dukla Prague back in European competition and see what they can potentially do. But it's just amazing seeing a club like Dukla with the honours that they held and the kind of history that they had sort of go the way that they did. I mean, in the very first season of the Czechoslovak Cup, 1960-1961, the Dukla team completed a double, and that was the very first double that was available, and they won it. At one point, they had 7 players representing them at the World Cup in 1962, and Czechoslovakia got to the final and then lost to Brazil. It was an absolutely fantastic footballing nation. It was a fantastic team. And in the end, things just kind of went out quite quietly. Would you agree with that, Phil, from what you know about Dukla?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you correctly said, they had a number of internationals in their squad, but it wasn't just the 1962 team. When they won the 1976 European Championships, obviously that were in Yugoslavia. As a matter of fact, there were only 3 members of the Dukla Prague squad in that team, and that was Ivor Victor, who was the elastic, spectacular goalkeeper, all dressed in black, kind of similar to Lev Yashin in that respect, and there was Zdeněk Nahoda, who was a really, really good creative forward, sort of playing behind the front 2, but he scored bags of goals, and he was an excellent player. And then there was a regular in the Czech team called František Stambaka, who was part German and part Czech. But 2 of those players were absolutely pivotal to the Czechoslovakia winning that tournament. Nahoda scored in the semi-final against the Netherlands in Belgrade, and he went on to score a penalty in the final shootout against world champions and Euro champions at the time. So it was no mean feat for him to do against West Germany. Mm-hmm. And of course, Ivor Victor was resolute between the sticks. He had a fantastic game. So 2 of their players having a massive effect on the outcome of that tournament. And then, of course, you move forward 4 years. And in 1980, prior to the Euros in 1980, the Czechoslovakian Olympic squad, containing 5 Dukla players, won the gold medal there in the Lenin Stadium, beating East Germany in the final 1-0. But they knocked out some good teams along the way. They knocked out Yugoslavia and Colombia along the way to the final. And then, of course, that kind of span over to the 1980 Euros, where there were 8 members of the Dukla Prague squad. So they had a huge kind of say in that tournament. And again, they excelled and finished 3rd, beating the hosts, Italy, in the 3rd place playoff, again on penalties. So yeah, they had a massive impact on the Czechoslovakian national team. And then moving forward to 82, they had seven players in the squad. But you can see, we talk about the declining standards of Dukla heading into the communist era. By World Cup 1990, there was only 1 Dukla player in the squad. So you can see that, like you said, there was a very sharp decline for Dukla on the playing side post-communism, and that was all because of where they came from initially.
Yeah, I mean, of course, they were sort of linked with the army, and maybe married's not the right word, but they certainly had strong affiliations with the army as well, didn't they? And I think that probably played its part. And we've spoken before about the kind of politics behind football in the Soviet Union and how funding would be allocated based on whether the club was an army club, whether they were a state club, police club, etc., etc. So I can imagine that probably had a factor in their decline.
Yeah, it did, buddy. I mean, when they were put together in 1948, they were part of the regime. Really, the 2 key members who started the club were a guy called Alexei Chapika and his father-in-law called Clement Gottwald, and they were both Stalinists within the Czechoslovakian Communist Party, and they were the ones that kind of put the measures in place that allowed Dukla to pilfer all the players from all the good teams in Czechoslovakia, and they started off by absolutely by dragging about 6 of the players from Slavia Prague, who were previously dominant, and putting them in their service, much akin to the way it happened in like Romania and Albania at the time. So they absorbed players into their squad, never to return to their parents' club. So that they weren't particularly liked because they were a truly communist entity. Like you said, teams like CSK Moscow and Sofia, the CSKs, and Dynamo Berlin and Kiev and Bucharest and Dynamo Tbilisi and Dynamo Tirana, even they were all heavily affiliated to either the army or the secret police, and Dukla were that kind of club.
I mean, it's interesting as well because I think what a lot of people don't realise as well is that despite the kind of politics of it, Dukla Prague were huge, and their reputation really was across the world stage. And there's I suppose it's a bit of a kind of niche, if you like. There was one that was called the International Soccer League, I think it was, and there was the American Challenge Cup, and it was founded by the people within the US and other countries, kind of NASL based, and it was American based, but they would basically get teams from Europe over. And they would play against each other, and they'd play against American teams, etc., etc. It only lasted for around 4 or 5 years, I think. But Dukla's supremacy at the time was so undisputed that the organisers of the American Challenge Cup, they actually got them over, and Dukla actually won 3 American Challenge Cups while they were over there. They beat America RJ from Brazil, they beat West Ham 1-0, and then drew with them 1 each as well. And they beat a number of other teams. Absolutely fascinating just how dominant this team truly were for the era. Coming from a country where a lot of people in the West might not know an awful lot about football, it's really, really fascinating to me how this knowledge kind of goes out the window a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, you refer to the 60-61 League Cup double season. That was the inaugural season of the International Soccer League in America, and in that tournament they won a 2-legged final against Everton, and they beat Everton in the first leg 7-2, and beat them in the second leg 2-0. So that is testimony to the type of football that they were playing and the kind of playing staff that they had at that moment in time. And of course, a chunk of that squad went on to become the Czechoslovakian World Cup squad of 1962. So a formidable team, yeah.
Yeah.
World class then, but you think a basis of a team that we're second, in the World Cup. That's some going. I'm just trying to think of a sort of a modern comparison, really, and I can't really come up with one where you got 7 players forming the basis of a team that finished second in the world. I don't think there is a modern comparison, really.
Not really. I think the closest they certainly didn't finish second, but the closest team that you can kind of compare is probably Soviet Union in 1986, who had the squad that could have gone on to win the tournament, and they had 10 players who played for Dynamo Kiev, and the only player who didn't was the keeper, Rene Dassaev, who played for Spartak. But they certainly didn't elevate themselves to the kind of plateau that Czechoslovakia did. They of course didn't reach a final, although they were a fantastic side.
Maybe Yugoslavia as well. I think they had maybe 3 or it's not 7. I mean that's obviously an outstanding amount, but I think they had 3 or 4 players at that time from Partizan just before the Yugoslav war. And they had quite a few from Dynamo Zagreb as well. But again, I think you're absolutely right, Dave. There's nothing that can really compare to that. It's a phenomenal feat to produce enough players to go to a World Cup and be making up at least 3/4 of the team like that. I don't think it's something that we would ever see again.
No, I think you're right. I mean, particularly this day and age with the amount of money in the game, and that players bought in, and go to your big money clubs like your Man Cities, your PSGs and whatever. So no, I think I think those sort of days are probably long gone, aren't they?
Unfortunately so. Well, obviously Dukla's domination sort of continued for an extended period of time, but of course when the Soviet Union fell and the club's kind of really long association with the military came to an end, and the money and the ability to just pinch all these players sort of dried up, then their status pretty much collapsed overnight. So in the 1993-94 Czech First League, they employed 3 different managers over the course of the season. They won just one of their 30 matches, which was a 1-0 win over Hradec Králové, probably pronouncing that completely wrong. And they finished rock bottom. I mean, it was a sensational collapse for a team which had so much history.
It was, buddy. I mean, after communism's fall in 1989, like you said, they become an unattractive proposition for fans, and fell into a financial free fall, and nobody wanted to sponsor them. And as you say, when the Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, when it split, they finished bottom of the Czech Republic League, and then became bankrupt. And at that point, enter a Czech businessman called Bohumír Duričko, who was the businessman who bought FK Pribram, who were situated 40 miles outside Prague. And then he merged the 2 clubs. So he merged FK Pribram and Dukla Prague, the original entity of Dukla Prague, and then named them under the new moniker of Pribram in 1997.
He's basically the Pete Winkleman of the Czech Republic.
Yeah. They are like, it's mad. They're like the MK Dons and Wimbledon teams of the the Czech Republic. Although I'm reliably told there isn't that kind of animosity between the clubs. They're just they sort of get on. But maybe, yeah. But you can't imagine it. I mean, if that was England, and as it's happened, there'd be a deep hatred. But the only thing I can attribute that to is maybe they don't take the football as seriously in the Czech Republic. Maybe we're going to get a lot of free fall off the back of that comment, but
I mean, a few other factors as well. But I mean, I suppose if you think about it, when the Soviet Union collapsed, it opened up a lot of markets for a lot of rich people to do what they wanted, right? And that happens anywhere in the world, regardless of the context. But for all the turmoil and for a lot of the pain that a lot of these people would have went through, then football was probably playing second fiddle a lot of the time. And maybe it's the case that a lot of the support had maybe dwindled and the same feelings just weren't there for Dukla anymore. It's interesting thinking about it. We definitely need some more fan accounts to work that out, because I think that's quite an interesting point to delve into.
You can kind of see both sort of sides of the argument there, because I think over here, I look at it's not football but rugby league in Yorkshire. When heavy industry collapsed, what happened with Thatcherism and the coal mines, they held on to rugby league and the rugby league clubs as this is still us and our identity. So perhaps there is a sort of Englishness and thing there that that perhaps you haven't got that as much. I know the struggles obviously over there are much greater than the struggles here. But if you look at where parts of the north are these days, we're not that far from sort of East German standards anymore. But I can see sort of both sides. I think kind of I'd be wanting to grab hold of that. This is still me. This is part of me. But then again, I suppose on the other side of the coin, if you're struggling just to scrape by, and live, then it's a different proposition, isn't it?
Yeah. And then there's also the kind of residual kind of communist element of the club that when the communists went, nobody missed them. And Dukla Prague were wrapped up in that fall, and they went into they died basically. They died but then in 2007 they were revived when the management took over another club called Jakubčovice, and they were a beleaguered second tier club. and they bought into that, and that's where the FK Dukla Prague came from, the second Dukla Prague. And eventually this Phoenix club returned to the top tier in 2011.
Of course, as you mentioned before, the original Dukla Prague, they merged with another team in the second tier at the time. Was it FC Pribram? You said Porto Pribram or something like that. That was in 1986.
FK Pribram,
Yeah, that's what they changed their name to. And they still exist. They still compete. I think they're still in the second tier.
Buddy, I looked at the table today, and FK Dukla are second, FK Pribram a fourth. So I think they're about 30 games in. So it looks like Dukla, they're about 4 points ahead of third place, and the top two go up. So it looks like Dukla could be in the top tier again next year. So that'll be interesting.
It will be interesting, and as you said there, that was kind of the end of the original Dukla Prague, because they merged, and that was that. For a period of time, they sort of fell out of history. But then this other team come along, FK Dukla Prague, founded in 1958. Their best season up until 2001 had been a second place finish in the Prague Championship in 1984 and 85. And then all of a sudden, they take the name FK Dukla Prague, they change their logo to Dukla Prague's original logo, they take the club colours, and then they just start competing as Dukla Prague. And I know you mentioned that they're a kind of Phoenix club, and I think there is an element of a Phoenix club in that, but to me, that doesn't seem like they're the successor to the original club. I know they're sort of from the same area, Prague. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, Davice is where the Jaliska is. So, and that's where Dukla Davice originate from too. So they are in the same area, and they and then the hybrid club moved into the Jaliska afterwards as well. So they've always, a team under the guise of Dukla Prague have always kind of played at that stadium. And it's a very kind of middle class, cool part of town up there in the hills, and it's where all the kind of old administrational offices were, and there's universities up there, and I tend to think that those parts of town, they're not really, you don't, forgive me for saying this if you're a Dukla Prague fan and you disagree, but they don't develop the kind of hardcore football fan that you will get in the grittier kind of back roads of like the Czech Republic, and definitely not in the in Britain.
Well, I suppose though, in the Soviet era, presumably that area, there'd have been high-rise blocks, and there probably would have been more a community surrounding the stadium. Whereas nowadays, you can imagine there's an element of gentrification's probably seeped in. Prague's a very, very popular city. There's probably Airbnbs up that way, and it'll have become a middle-class part of town. And yeah, you're right. You're right in what you're saying, that it's hard to develop football communities in those parts of town. And the more things that you take away around football stadiums, and the more that you shift to create these giant fucking cookie cutter monstrosities that we see today, then the more you're taking away from that community. So presumably, when Dukla Prague, the original club, when they died and they went away, and the club that they merged to become moved away from the Jaliska, presumably the majority of the community would have left as well.
You would have expected so, yeah. I mean, as you say, there would have been party members living in that part of town, surrounding the stadium. And when communism fell, you would presume that they were moved out of properties, and everything was put up for tender then. So you get the kind of rich immigrants and Czech people who'd been outside of the country living somewhere else, who wanted to return to a non-communist Czech Republic, and the complete demographic changed in that area of the city, and it was felt in the attendances. They never got great attendances. Dukla, they were followed for European games at the Jaliska, and there were big crowds there. But for home league games throughout their their kind of history. They were like 2,500, 3,000, and when communism fell, they were pulling in like three-figure crowds. So the interest had well and truly dropped.
It's kind of like the inverse of the process that happens over here, isn't it? Really, when I was just thinking about you say my book when the circus leaves town. Football clubs up in sticks and leaving sort of working class community. I've obviously I've been up to Manchester today and I travelled through East Manchester through the Etihad campus, which is you've got this £1 billion, multi-billion-pound organisation, all these facilities, and literally next to them you've got some of the most deprived people in the northwest of England. Literally you can kick a ball from the Etihad onto some terribly deprived housing estates. So it's like the inverse, of what's happened over here, I suppose.
Yeah, when I was doing my dissertation on kind of heritage teams surrounding football in Scotland, one of the clubs that I touched on was Clyde. Clyde are a really interesting club from a heritage perspective because you've got this kind of element where so Clyde were originally based in Barrowfield, which is in the east end of Glasgow, not far from where Celtic Park are based. In fact, Celtic used Barrowfield as a training ground for a very long time, and I think they actually still own the rights and the land to it. But they then moved to Shawfield, which is kind of down across the river. And they then left Shawfield because the place was a bit of a state and it turned into a Greyhound stadium. But since then, Clyde have kind of lived this nomadic existence. And then coming into the modern era, they rented Broadwood from North Lanarkshire Council, which is a way out. It's actually not even in Cumbernauld. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing around it. And I mean, genuinely, absolutely nothing. It's fields and like Persimmon housing estates and stuff like that, Redwood homes. So you've kind of got these three generations of Clyde fans. One who are the older generation who remember them playing at Shawfield, and then their children who remember them being a nomadic club and ground sharing, and then this new generation who had them at Broadwood. And now they've been kicked out of Broadwood and they're ground sharing again, and it's like, when's this going to end? But the point that some people and myself were trying to make was that if Clyde were able to move back to where their historic home was, either in Shawfield or at Barrowfield or close by, then they'd be able to build more of a community around that, and they would stop kind of going in this downward trajectory that they've been on, because a football club is as much its community and the houses that are around it, the pubs, the restaurants, the shops and everything else, as it is just a stadium as we know them today. So it sounds like that Dukla maybe suffered from a bit of that as well, that if they're just surrounded by party officials and all these middle class elements, they're not going to have much else around it that kind of feeds into this working class football experience that we all have and that we've all had for years.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think they just lost their mojo when communism went, but they've kind of because of things like we talked about half man half biscuit, and I know that's a kind of small contributor, but to have such an iconic kit and to have this kind of hipster feel around your football club, I think somebody made a very kind of astute investment when they forged the two teams, Dukla Davitsi and Jakub Zavitsi, because they evidently saw a decent prospect there. I think they were probably right, because from a marketing point of view, Dukla Prague are still. It's still one of the most coveted away shirts every Christmas, as I say. But no, it's still a fantastic kit, and it's still iconic.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking earlier on. You can pick up the 60s retro away shirts for £45 on the old internet. So yeah, you think it could be something you could really do something with. I guess these days, it's more of an appreciation of that sort of thing. But particularly, I say Prague as a city is very much a place to go. My mate, the DJ guy that I mentioned, for a few years now, we've been talking. We talked about going over there sort of pre-COVID, and everything like that. I mean, we still haven't got around to doing it, and yeah, I think. Although another mate of mine went over there, and I said, "What do you think?" He said, "I thought it was crap," and I sat in a hotel room with my mate playing cards all day.
Yeah,
But, but he's a bit of a Neanderthal.
Yeah, we've been several times, and believe it's fantastic. It's a fantastic city. We've been 3 times, and every time we've had a terrific experience. And just for the connoisseur of football grounds, it's amazing because you've got the Letna where Sparta play, and then you've got Slavia Stadium, and then you can go to the Dolacek. You can do all these things in one day, and then you kind of have a little amble through the Jewish Quarter, and then you've got Vitoria Ziskov as well, and then up in the hills you've got Dukla, and if you buy a tram ticket, you can get to all of them for like about 40 pence in one day, and do the whole trip. So it's well worth the trip, and that's alongside the fact that beer costs less than water over there, and the food's pretty superb as well.
I think I'm going to apply for Czech citizenship. Actually,
yeah. I don't think that'd be a bad deal, to be honest, Dave.
They done not too bad, FK Dukla, though. They've been in the first league. They won the 2 Liga and things like that. So they, and they've had a couple of cup runs where they've got to the quarterfinals sort of over the last decade and stuff. So they certainly made the mark again. I suppose that the question will always come back to, yes, they're wearing the colours. Yes, they have the badge. Are these guys really the successors of the original Dukla Prague?
I think it's an opinion that's kind of rests in the kind of it's divisive, isn't it? It's a divisive argument, but I think if the fans who were originally there when it was Dukla Prague in the up until the mid 90s, if they believe that it's the same Dukla Prague, well, and they support them with the same passion and the same kind of verve that they did back then, well, who's to disagree with them?
The fans of the core element of that, they're the ones that make the sort of thing about it.
I definitely agree with that. It's who are we to judge sort of thing. It's like the going back to the AFC Wimbledon MK Dons thing. AFC Wimbledon's fans are adamant that they are not us. They stole our club, they stole our history.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. And I think most English football supporters would probably share that view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So similarly, if you've got fans of what we'd see as a new Dukla Prague say no, that's us, we're still the same club, then again, who are we to argue, I suppose.
I think adversely, like the FK Dukla haven't kind of stolen the heritage of the old Dukla Prague club, so they don't claim to have won all those trophies that the old Dukla Prague do. Whereas Wimbledon, they've taken the FA Cup win from 1988 and made that the new club's achievement. So it's odd, isn't it? It's like a bit of a paradox, really, that it can go one way, but it can go the other, dependent on how you want to kind of how you want to interpret your club's history.
Yeah, I think that's an important one. I suppose, it depends on the context, and I think straight away if clubs and owners and the people behind it are doing it for malicious reasons or to piggyback off it. And I think if you're researching it and you're an outsider looking in, that's probably what it seems like most of the time. It's like you're picking up the name of a club that was far bigger and far more successful than your own, and you're choosing to run with it because it will bring you support. But I think, as you said, the fans are the important element there. If they decide that it's okay, and if they say, we're fine with that, And I think if the other club don't go about it in a way that's like, oh, we've always been Dukla Prague, and we done all those European Cup runs and stuff. If they don't go on it like that, then I guess it's okay. It's just it's a bit of a strange one. So I don't know. I'm in two minds about it. It's a really really interesting kind of look into how these types of things work. So yeah, not too sure. Not too sure.
It's like anything, nothing's necessarily black and white, is it? It's and I think we hit upon a little bit of a grey area with this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Are they the MK Dons of the Czech Republic? No.
Depends on how you interpret it.
I would say no. I don't think they're that
Yeah.
bad. I mean, that's the thing. I think that's what's swaying me, is that the MK Dons thing was clearly malicious, very clearly malicious, and there's a lot of people still rightfully pissed off about it. Whereas it doesn't seem like these guys are doing something similar. So I think they can get a pass, and I think that's fair enough. But
do you know what the disclaimer quote that I use whenever someone puts a contentious question in front of me?
Go for it.
You may say that. I couldn't possibly agree.
You sound like a politician now, Phil.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Can neither confirm nor deny. But they're a very, very interesting club. Obviously, their kits as well are iconic. The name's iconic, and it looks like they're going to be back in the top tier of Czech football before long, and hopefully continuing the legacy of Dukla Prague. And as I said, as long as they don't claim their history and their European runs, and maybe they can add to that, and they can kind of give them a new chapter and breathe some new life into one of the former greats of Czech football, I suppose. I mean, on your travels, Phil, have you ever came across any other clubs from the Czech Republic that have been lost or went defunct? Any good stories surrounding those kind of themes?
Well, there was Dukla Brno who were also an army team that were stationed in Brno that I was interested to kind of find out a little bit, but their history is a bit ambiguous. I'm not actually sure whether they became Zabrojska, who won the Czech league in 77-78. But as I say, trying to access their old stadium was difficult when we went over there. So we give up on that in the end. But I have been I went to Romania and came across some sides there. There was one called Traktorul Brasov, whose stadium was still there, and it was a kind of rusted remnant. But they were also one of these kind of teams that were regime centered. You can tell they are, because they've all got industry names after them. And Traktorul were obviously the like farming or tractor or agriculture kind of branch of the party. And that they drummed up a support by having people who worked in that industry. But yeah, I think Dukla Brno is the one that comes to mind first.
Yeah, they sound quite an interesting one. I'd like to research more about them. The ones that have the kind of contentious histories that you don't find an awful lot about online, they're always the most interesting ones, I find.
Yeah, definitely, mate. Definitely. You have to. I always find that it's great, and I think we've discussed this before. When you go into that little research rabbit hole, you think you're looking for one thing, and you come out finding out something completely different, and that's the great enjoyment that you can take out of research, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm obviously working on a new book at the moment, and a mate of mine's a Manchester United fan, so I enjoyed winding him up about the fact that the guy that formed the club that became Manchester United was actually a Scouser. So he really didn't appreciate that.
Well, that's something that I say wound up in air quotes, because it's what little teams do to fans of bigger teams. It's Hibs fans always, when Celtic fans go there, they always chant, if it wasn't for us, you'd be Rangers fans. And they say it in a more derogatory way, which I won't air in the podcast because that's just going to lead to hassle. But, obviously because they were founded first and they were in Edinburgh and all this. Sorry for part, just nonsense. Always good for a wind up, always good for football power. But yeah, so Dukla Brno's one. That's one that I'm going to go away and research a little bit more on. Any other clubs that kind of spring to mind that Particularly, I'm thinking maybe Soviet era that kind of went under as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union and everything kind of drying up there. Is it been a bit tougher? Did it happen? Because I know it's been the case in a lot of other former Soviet countries where a lot of these clubs merged most of the time. Was that quite common in the Czech leagues as well, or was it more a case of some clubs just ceased to exist pretty much overnight?
It was, yeah, I think it was more a case of anything that was kind of affiliated to the party, and they just give up business because they were remnants. You know, nobody liked the party, nobody liked communism, and nobody missed it when it was gone. So a lot of them just ceased to exist, or they went through name changes to change their identity. But the thing with Dukla, I think, because they were so vast and so iconic, and the you know to see, just looking at their strip, you just think, oh, I want that strip, and they've survived in a way just because, even though they were part of the communist mechanics, that they just look so good. You know what I mean? So
I know it's very much reminiscent of that era, and you get a lot of the former communist teams that have kits like that as well. They're absolute worldies, and um, they've become a bit of a collector's item as well, particularly the Dukla Prague kits. But anything from their pennants, I quite like collecting pennants. Always been after a Dukla Prague one. The badges as well. Like there's just so much about them as well. But I mean, kind of coming back to their players that were in the national team, just something that we touched on earlier, which was an incredible feat. I wonder if it'll ever be the case that FK Dukla can repeat that feat by getting 7 of their players into the national team course. It's a little bit different now, with geopolitics has moved on, to put it lightly. And I don't think that's something that we'd see in any national team either, as Dave mentioned. But the current Czech national team maybe could be doing with some consistency in having more players from the same club, because they've had a bit of a rocky spell over the last few years, haven't they?
yeah, I'd say so. I think, like, in answer to the first question, can there be 7 players from the same kind of? We touched on it earlier, and I don't think that is possible. Yeah, you may get one come through who's a leading light in Czech football, possibly from Dukla if they go to if they get into the top league, but they'll be gone. The financial element of football. They'll be gone within a couple of seasons if they hit the high notes in the domestic game. They'll be joining one of the top 4 leagues in Europe, and it's a shame. So all of these countries that had strong domestic games, it's not going to happen in the near future, if ever again. I think the fall of communism, it changed footballing history in that area of the world forever, and I don't think there is any return.
Yeah, well, it's an economic thing, isn't it? It changed the economics, and the economics of football inevitably changed. And they players can come and go as they choose, and they'll make the most of the opportunities that they can get, I guess. And football is, it's modern football anyway. It's a neoliberal product. It's a global product, and even I suppose years gone by, your superstars, your genuine superstars would be up and out. Even just your average players now will still go and earn a very, very good living out of football across Europe's top leagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think obviously the SPFL is my benchmark, if you like, for comparisons against pretty much everything. And I think from my experience of the Czech League and watching the odd game here and there, it is a little bit like Scottish football in that you've got 2 big teams and then everyone else, and then you've kind of got subdivisions within that. Is that the case, Phil? Is there other teams that kind of compete? Because to me, it seems like it's Slavia and Sparta, and then however many other jobbers just kind of competing and trying to get their stranglehold on it.
I think you're. I mean, where there used to be kind of when it was the Czechoslovakian league, you'd have some of the strong Slovakian sides like Slovan Bratislava and Baník Ostrava, and but I think it's lessened the kind of strength of the domestic game, and I would concur with the fact that there are generally just two teams competing for that Czech First League now, Slavia and Sparta, which makes it incredibly mundane because there used to be that variety and that diversity, but you know, economics, as Dave said, and the fact that communism has kind of ironically has killed the competitive nature of the domestic game in the Eastern Bloc.
But in that context, though, that potentially would make it a little bit easier for Dukla to get back in there and amongst the mix. If you got two sides like Sparta and Slavia, and the rest is much of a muchness. Well, who knows?
You would think so, and if you are looking to invest in football, you'd be doing it on the cheap if you were doing it in the Czech Republic, wouldn't you? And it wouldn't take as vast a kind of financial investment to make it work.
Perhaps we need to put a consortium together.
Should we do it? Yeah, should we have a chat afterwards? I've got about 20p.
I can't think of any quicker way to financially devastate all three of us and put our names in shame for the rest of history. I think it would go. Well, listen, you, Dave, you know how to run a business. Phil, you're a clever guy. Not got a fucking clue what I would do. I'd find something to just fucking end up manager or something like that.
I'll tell you what, but if you did do it, you might be broke, but at least you'd be able to drink cheap beer and eat goulash every day for under a £5, so you'd be all right.
Well, that's what I'm leaning to. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, obviously, Phil, you're in the Czech Republic. There, you said you've been several times. Have you ever been to any games?
Yeah, I went.
I go just around.
Yeah, I went to a Sparta game against Sigma Olomouc. And that was a cracking. But the thing with Sparta, they were popular before communism, and they've retained that support. So when you go to their stadium, it's very much a different experience to when you go to Dukla's, which is kind of fans sparsely kind of populating different areas of the stand. They have a culture and they have a history and they have a fan base that has remained with them and has remained in their area of the city for pre-communism. So when I'm going to Prague, that's the team that I mean I've been to Bohemians ground as well, but that's a team I'll go and see because they are one of the real historic teams of Prague.
Bohemians seems good as well, though. I've read about Bohemians Prague as well, and they seem like a great bunch of guys. A great party atmosphere around the ground, and obviously it's a lot smaller scale now. Is that right? They're kind of further down the tiers, or are they still in the first division?
No, they are back in the Czech First League now.
Are they okay? I thought they were a bit lower down.
But they don't get they are considered like one of the hipster teams of the Czech Republic and of Prague as well, and they do tend to kind of get the artisan crowd. It's that part of town where the Dolicek is, where it's a very kind of liberal and an interesting area of the city. So people like that gravitate to Bohemians, and yeah, it's a great ground, and again, it's a historic club that's steeped in history as well. Although during communism, they were a Spartak as well before they became Bohemians.
They reminded me a lot of Union Berlin, and during communism, Union Berlin are based in Köpenick in Berlin, which is in the former East, and you read stories about their fans. Their kind of fan culture around Union Berlin has always been, we're not left, we're not right. We just like to be left alone and do our own thing and have a party. Just don't be a dick, sort of thing. Which I think is quite a good philosophy. And their one of their deep rivals were Dynamo Dresden. I think it was BFC Dresden. It would have been at the time, or another kind of club that was named that. Always get mixed up with them. And after communism, Union retained much of their fans, though at the time it was quite small because of the disparity between teams from the East and the West. Whereas Dresden, because they were very much the party of the state, and the secret police and stuff, they were hated universally. And you still have some supporters of the successor club or whoever's there now, but Union retained the majority of their fan base, so it's quite a similar story.
Yeah, it's like it was BSG Dynamo Berlin, wasn't it? They were kind of the patron was Eric Mikla, who was the head of the Stasi, who was the secret police.
The Stasi team.
Yeah, so he was at their for. So yeah, it's an interesting story, but it's happened in so many different communist states. Like with the book that I wrote about Albania, there's the Dynamo Tirana, as with Dynamo Berlin, they were the vehicle of the Albanian secret police called the Sigurimi, and as soon as communism fell again, like Dukla, that and like Dynamo Berlin, fans didn't want to know. They didn't want to know to such an extent. They changed the name to Olympic Dynamo Tirana, but then changed it back to Dynamo Tirana, and now they've moved out of Tirana entirely, and they go under the guise of Dynamo City, and they play in Durrës, which is 40 miles out towards the coast on the Adriatic Sea. So yeah, it's Union have kept their supporters because they were considered a more wholesome and non-party friendly entity. And I think now that they had a friendship with Hertha fans during the days of communism, and now it's considered quite a friendly derby because they were always Hertha fans used to come into East Berlin and go to Union games, and when Union fans were permitted to leave East Berlin to go into the West, they used to take a following to Hertha, so it was quite a friendly rivalry.
Yeah, quite amicable, and I suppose that's kind of the beauty of it, is that it was football sort of coming together. And can imagine it would be the Hertha fans saying, like, we know what you guys are kind of living under. It's not very good, which is an understatement. So, it is very friendly from what I heard, and it's quite a nice element about it. What about yourself, Dave? Have you ever been to any games in the Czech Republic before when you've been over visiting?
No, I've not partaken. I mean, the discussion I had with my mate John about going over there. One of the things I'd be looking to do is obviously check out the football side. Pardon the pun. But no, not been to the Czech Republic as yet, but it's definitely on the agenda.
Yeah, be something I'd be looking to do as well. I mean, Phil certainly sold it if we didn't need it selling to us already. It's a beautiful country. Prague's a beautiful city by all accounts, and the football fans are passionate as well. Why don't you tell us about some of their stars that they had, some of the best players that played for them, and the careers that they went on to make?
Well, of course, I mean the key one that he won the Ballon d'Or in 1962 was Joseph Mazepust,
yes,
who was he won 8 titles with them as a player. And won 9 titles. He was the manager of when I spoke as Zabojska Brno. They won their only Czechoslovakian title under Joseph Mazepust. But he was creative, skillful, superb passer of the ball, and the only thing that he had, I think it was a kind of go-to communist comparison in the day. He was like. He was compared to Puskas, but he didn't have the goal kind of ratio of Puskas, but he was still a phenomenally talented player, and he scored in that World Cup final against Brazil. He gave the Czechs the lead, but he's still fondly remembered amongst the new Dukla fans. So he's one of them. And of course, the other one, going to the very tail end after the communism fell, Pavel Nedved. He started his career at Dukla, and everybody knows about. I don't have to talk about Pavel Nedved. Everyone knows what a fantastic footballer he was. So, looking at both ends of the track, the start of communism and Dukla as a kind of football club, and at the tail end, and everything in between. They had great players in between: Ladislav Vizek, Zdeněk Nahoda that I've talked about before, and of course the goalkeeper Ivo Victor, all Dukla legends.
Nedved was a fantastic footballer. One of those. Yeah, I think occasionally you get players from countries that are perhaps not viewed as top tier countries, but that a player comes along that would perhaps fit in anywhere. And I think Nedved's he was definitely one of those superb midfield player.
And as we said earlier, I mean, the club is still liable to create one player like that, but you're never going to get the 7 in the national squad from a side, because they're gone too quick, aren't they, Dave?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah,
brilliant. I mean, definitely they hit. I mean, obviously, if you have 7 players called up to the national team, then you're not just going to have a squad of huddies running about the field every weekend, are you? So a phenomenal set of players that they had, and a phenomenal team as well, and a really, really great story. I think you've convinced me otherwise that the new club are the successor to them. So I think I'll pay a bit more attention to them now that I don't have that kind of disposition against them, if you will. But anything else you want to add just before we finish up for the night, lads?
No, I mean, it's been a bit of an education for me. I've had a lot more about Czech football now than I did before we kicked in. It's been an enjoyable hour, and big thanks to Phil. First time we've spoken, and I look forward to. I follow the Football Geeks account, and I look forward to hearing more from you in future, mate.
Oh, thank you, mate. Yeah, mate. Oh, yeah, that's great to know. It's still always fun, just fun talking to two football guys. It is one of the great levelers, isn't it? When you get together with people who talk football, you might not have anything else in common in the world, but as soon as you start talking about football, you can spend hours just chatting.
Just chatting, just trivia, going on about it. It's more than just 90 minutes, isn't it? And even when you're just in the ground for those 90 minutes, everyone around you, give or take, is your friend for a little bit. It's all a commonality, and it is a leveler. You're absolutely right, and I think that's a fantastic way to put it. But as Dave said, thanks very much for coming on, Phil. You're welcome in the podcast at any time. Of course, you've got a book out now. Are you still writing the book? Has it been published?
Yeah, the book's gone to the printers. It's out via Pitch Publishing in June, and it's called Inside the Hermit Kingdom: Football Stories from Stalinist Albania. To my knowledge, it's the first ever English language book about football in communist Albania. So hopefully that will give me some leverage. Although when I told friends about it, they were like, "That's a bit niche, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, but I like niche, so have that."
Sometimes you can go down such rabbit holes with it, and then you start writing a book, and you're like, "This is like, how do more people not know about this?" And I'm speaking to this person. This is amazing, etc., etc. And then you talk to someone who's maybe not that into football, and they're like, "That's really, really, really specific." And it's like, you're like, "No, it's not. Everyone knows about this stuff."
Well, another of my friends said, "Football's football, and if you like football, you'll read a football book, whatever's in it." So that gives me a bit of hope as well. But I've thoroughly enjoyed writing it, and there's some incredible stories in there. And also my friend Irving, who's a FK Tirana fan, he lived through the era, so a lot of the chapters in it actually come from like the horse's mouth. They come from via the words of an Albanian who lived through communism and went to the games every week. So it's a really, really good read.
Yeah, I look forward to picking that up. Just more interest in kind of Cold War era history and stuff like that as well. It's all a good mix of stuff that I'm into. Of course, Dave, as you've mentioned, you've got When the Circus Leaves Town. That's been out for coming up a couple of years now. Is it a couple of years?
Yeah, nearly 18 months. It's still doing all right by all accounts. So pleased with that. Got another one coming out next year. Work and play. It's industrial roots of English football. It's about works teams basically, and how they evolved over time, and the ones that are still around, and it's that's been real good fun to write so far. Again, some really good stories.
Of course, Stoke probably being the best example of one of those teams coming from the Potteries.
Yeah, well, I mean, Stoke were a works team, but not a potteries team. They were established by railway workers.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So, they were a railway workers team. But even you couldn't make it up. The railway workers in question were from the Chapter House Public School. They came north to work for the North Staffordshire Railway Company, and decided to get together with some locals and set a football club up. Then that became Stoke City.
There you go. Fascinating stuff. Looking forward to that coming out as well. And of course, to all our listeners, you can pick up Dave's book, When the Circus Leaves Town now. It's out via Pitch Publishing. You can get it on Amazon and in all good bookstores, I'm sure. And Phil's book, as he said, will be out next June, so please pick that up. That'll be a really fascinating read. A country that hasn't been covered in the English language yet. I mean, what's not to love about that? That's something that you'll get to read for the very first time and learn more about football during that era in Albania, country that doesn't really get a lot of press over here in terms of football, or just generally, really. So that's definitely something you should pick up when it's out as well. But for now, Dave, say goodnight.
Night all. Good hour that. Enjoyed it. Brilliant, lads.
Phil, say goodnight.
Good night, everyone. Very enjoyable. Thanks, boys.
And we'll see you all again next week. It was very enjoyable indeed. Good night.